Hello, and welcome. You found your way to a quiet place, a place to let the noise of the day gently recede. Settle in, allow your body to feel heavy and at ease, and let your mind drift with me. Our story tonight is not one of action or of excitement, but of stillness and shadow. It's a journey into a deep and perplexing quiet. We travel back to the year 1970, to the Kingdom of Norway. Picture a nation of serene beauty, a country defined by its deep fjords, its silent forests, and a sense of peaceful, orderly prosperity. It was a nation that felt a world away from the turmoil gripping other parts of the globe. And yet, even in this tranquil corner of Europe, the silent, chilly undercurrents of the Cold War were ever present. Our story is centered on a single, unanswered question. Who was the woman found in the Isdalen Valley? It is a question that would unravel a thread of meticulously crafted lies, of shifting identities and coded messages, leaving behind an enigma that has haunted Norway for over half a century. This is not a story about a conclusion, but about the search itself. It is the story of the Isdalen woman. So, take a soft, slow breath, and let us travel back to that quiet valley, just before the silence was broken. Our story begins not with a crime, but with a walk in the woods. Imagine the November 29, 1970. It is a Sunday. The air in the hills surrounding Bergen, Norway's second largest city, is crisp and cold with the scent of pine and damp earth. A university professor is hiking with his two young daughters, enjoying the stark late autumn beauty of a valley known to locals as Isdalen. Isdalen. In English, it translates to the Ice Valley, but over the centuries, it had acquired a more somber folkloric nickname, Death Valley. This was not due to any modern malice, but to its history. In the Middle Ages, it was a place where people took their own lives when they could no longer bear their hardships. In more recent memory, it had been the site of hiking accidents, its terrain unforgiving to the unwary. It was a place of profound, almost melancholy beauty, a valley of deep shadows and hushed quiet. As the professor and his daughters made their way along a trail, they became aware of an unusual smell on the wind. It was a strange, acrid scent of something burnt, entirely out of place in the clean, cold air of the valley. Curiosity piqued, they left the main path, following the scent deeper into the trees and up a rocky incline into a more remote, seldom visited part of the valley known as the Melting Pot. And there, nestled amongst the cold, grey boulders, was a scene of profound stillness and disquiet. They found the source of the smell, a small makeshift campfire that had burned out, but scattered around it were peculiar, almost staged artifacts. 2 half-liter bottles that once held a sweet liqueur, a plastic water bottle, a tube of sleeping pills, a silver spoon, the tattered remains of a rubber boot, and a silk umbrella. It was a strange collection of refuse to find in such a wild place, but it was what lay just beyond the dead campfire that turned this from a curious discovery into something else entirely. There, partially concealed by the rocks, was the figure of a woman. Her journey was clearly at its end. She was lying on her back, her arms drawn up towards her chest in a pose sometimes described as that of a fencer. The front of her body, her clothing and her skin, were severely burned, yet the back of her body was almost untouched. It was a scene that made no immediate sense. It did not look like a typical accident, nor did it look like a typical act of desperation. It was simply a question lying there in the silent heart of the valley. The professor quickly guided his daughters away, and once back in town, he notified the police. The authorities in Bergen soon arrived, and their investigation began. The initial survey of the scene only deepened the mystery. There was no purse, no identification of any kind. Every single label on her clothing, on the bottles, on the pill containers, anything that might have identified a brand name or a place of origin had been meticulously cut or rubbed off. Her fingerprints had been sanded away from the plastic bottles. Whoever this woman was, it seemed she had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase herself from the world. Or perhaps someone else had done it for her. As the investigators stood in that quiet, cold clearing, looking down at the strange and silent tableau, they could not have known that this was not the end of a single, tragic story. It was the very beginning of an enigma that would stretch across Europe, a puzzle box of false identities, secret codes, and Cold War suspicion. The woman in the Ice Valley was gone, and the search for who she truly was had just begun. The case of the unknown woman from Isdalen fell to the police force of Bergen. Imagine their position. In a city known for its quiet, predictable rhythms, they were now confronted with a scene that was anything but. Their work began with the slow, methodical process of gathering the sparse evidence from the rocky clearing. Every charred fragment, every bottle, every scrap of fabric was carefully collected, but each item seemed to only deepen the silence surrounding the victim. The woman's body was taken for a post-mortem examination. The autopsy provided a few clinical facts, but in doing so, it created even more profound questions. The cause of death was determined to be a combination of poisoning by phenobarbital, a powerful sedative, and carbon monoxide inhalation from the fire. Critically, the medical examiner found soot in her lungs. This told investigators one vital piece of information. She was alive when the fire started. This was not a case of someone trying to dispose of a body. The fire was part of the act that ended her life. Inside her stomach, they found more than 50 sleeping pills, not yet fully dissolved into her system. It was a lethal dose, but she had died before it could completely take effect. There were also faint bruises on her neck, though they were inconclusive. They could have been the result of a fall or perhaps a struggle. The evidence pointed in two contradictory directions at once. The pills suggested suicide, yet the violent nature of the fire and the strange circumstances suggested something else entirely. The most immediate challenge for the Bergen police was simple, yet monumental. Who was she? They had a face, and from that, a police artist created a composite sketch. It showed a woman who was estimated to be between 30 and 40 years old, with a round face, dark eyes, and an expression that seemed both watchful and distant. She was described as attractive, elegant, almost classic in her appearance. This sketch was circulated throughout Norway, and then through Interpol across Europe. Police checked dental records, a painstaking process in the PI digital age. They scoured endless lists of missing persons, but there were no matches. It was as if this woman had simply appeared in the valley, with no past, no family, and no one to report her missing. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation, for all its effort, had hit a solid wall. She was becoming known in the press as the woman who never was. The first real break in the case came not from a high-tech lab, but from human memory. A young attendant working at the luggage storage depot at Bergen Central Railway Station saw the sketch in the newspaper and felt a jolt of recognition. He remembered a woman who looked just like the sketch. She had been well dressed, he recalled, and had left 2 suitcases in a locker on the 23rd of November, 6 days before her body was found. The police rushed to the station. There, in locker number 404, were the 2 suitcases. They were unlocked. For the investigators, this was a moment of profound hope. Surely, inside these cases, they would find the clue that would unlock her identity and solve the mystery. They opened the first suitcase. Inside, they found clothes, dresses, coats, and other items, all of them of fine, fashionable quality. But just like the clothes found at the scene, every single identifying label had been meticulously removed. They found a hairbrush and cosmetics. They found a prescription lotion, but the label bearing the doctor's name and the date had been scraped clean, leaving only an unidentifiable number. The deliberate effort to remain anonymous was astonishing. It was in the lining of the second suitcase that the case transformed. Tucked away, they found something that shattered any remaining theory of this being an ordinary woman. They found 9 different wigs of various colors and styles. They found several pairs of eyeglasses with play, non-prescription glass. They found a small collection of currencies from various European and Norwegian banks. And they found a small notepad. This woman wasn't just anonymous. She was a woman of multiple identities. A woman equipped to change her appearance at a moment's notice. The investigation was no longer about a simple, tragic death in a lonely valley. It was now about a phantom who moved through the world in disguise. The 2 suitcases in the Bergen train station had not solved the mystery. They had revealed that the mystery was far deeper and more complex than anyone could have imagined. The police now had a trail, but it was a trail of smoke and mirrors. Of course, let us pick up the trail. The image on screen is a high quality, close-up photograph of the actual coded notepad found in the ISDAL woman's suitcase. The writing is cryptic. The narrator's voice remains a steady, calming presence. Segment 3. The turning point in the deepening mystery. Inside the second suitcase, among the wigs and the plain glass spectacles, lay the single most important clue of the entire investigation. A small, unassuming notepad. To the casual eye, its pages were filled with a meaningless jumble of letters, numbers, and symbols. It was not a diary written in plain language, but a series of cryptic entries, a code. For the Bergen police, This little book became the focal point of their entire inquiry. Their cryptographers set to work. Slowly, methodically, they began to see a pattern emerge. It was not a sophisticated military-grade cipher, but something more personal, a kind of shorthand designed to record a journey. They realized the sequences of letters and numbers corresponded to dates and places. M2802S could mean from May 28th to October 2nd. 022-028p likely meant from October 22nd to October 28th in Paris. One by one, the investigators began to translate these cryptic notes into a travel itinerary, a map of the Phantom's final weeks on Earth. And what a journey it was. The decoded notepad revealed a methodical and extensive trip across Europe. The trail hopped from city to city, always staying in respectable, if not luxurious, hotels. The police now had a path to follow. Using the dates from the notepad, they sent inquiries, complete with the woman's sketch, to hotels across the continent, and the replies began to pour in. With each reply, a new name, a new identity would surface. They discovered that in Paris, she had checked in as Vera Jarl. In Rome, she was Fenella Lodge in another city, Claudia Tilde in others, Genevieve Lancer, Elizabeth Lienhaufer, Alexius Anamerches. She used at least 8 different false passports. The police meticulously examined the hotel registration cards she had filled out. Each one was a work of fiction. She claimed different nationalities: Belgian, Yugoslavian, German, French. She listed different birth dates and occupations. Hotel staff who remembered her recalled a woman who was elegant, well-dressed, and fluent in multiple languages. She could switch between German, French, Flemish, and some English with ease. But she was always alone, always watchful, and always paid her bills in cash. Every new identity was a dead end. The names were false. The addresses she listed did not exist. The passport numbers she used were not registered. Each thread the police pulled on led them to a carefully constructed wall. The sheer professionalism of her anonymity was astounding. This was not the work of an amateur. In the context of 1970, with the Cold War dividing Europe, this pattern of behavior pointed overwhelmingly in one direction: espionage. The multiple identities, the disguises, the untraceable movements between major European cities, the fluency in several languages. It was all textbook tradecraft for an intelligence agent. Was she a spy for the Soviet KGB? For the Israeli Mossad? Was she a double agent, on the run after being compromised? The quiet, tragic death in a Norwegian valley now looked like the final act in a silent, invisible war. The decoded timeline eventually brought the investigators back to Norway. They traced her final journey. She had travelled from Paris to Stavanger, then to Bergen. She checked into the Hotel Esti, Svithen under the name Fenella Lodge. She then took a trip north to the city of Trondheim, staying for 2 nights, before returning once more to Bergen on the 23rd of November. It was on this day that she checked her 2 suitcases into the locker at the train station. She then checked into the Hotel Horrifying, this time using the name Elizabeth Lienhaufer. She was seen in the hotel, looking restless, sometimes gesturing to herself in the corridors as if in quiet conversation. She checked out on the morning of her death, paid her bill in cash, and asked the front desk to call her a taxi. From there, she seems to have vanished, only to be rediscovered days later in the Ice Valley. The police had done remarkable work. They had reconstructed the final, secret journey of the ISDAL woman. They had uncovered a web of aliases that stretched across the continent, but in doing so, they had only become more certain of how little they truly knew. They had the how and the where of her final weeks, but the fundamental who and why remained a complete void. The woman was no longer just an unidentified victim. She was a professional chameleon, an operator who lived her life in the shadows. The question for the investigators was no longer simply who had killed her, but who was she working for? Or who was she running from? The Bergen police had reached the end of every possible road. They had a phantom's itinerary, a collection of false names, and a suitcase full of disguises, but they were no closer to knowing the woman's true identity than they were on the day she was found. The meticulousness of her anonymity had defeated them. With no new leads to follow and political pressure to resolve the unnerving case, a decision had to be made. In early 1971, the investigation into the death of the ISDAL woman was officially closed. The conclusion entered into the public record was probable suicide. It was a neat and simple explanation for a case that was anything but. It accounted for the sleeping pills, but it quietly ignored almost everything else. The strange fire, the removed labels, the multiple identities, the coded notes, and the entire apparatus of a life lived in the shadows. For the investigators who had worked the case, it was a deeply unsatisfying conclusion, a bureaucratic tidying up of a profound mystery. It was an answer that answered nothing. A short time later, a funeral was held for the woman who had no name. It was attended by about 16 people, most of them members of the Bergen police force. They were the closest thing she had to a family in the end. The small group of strangers who had worked so tirelessly to give her back her name. She was given a Catholic burial, as she had been observed making the sign of the cross on a hotel registration form. She was laid to rest in a zinc coffin, specially chosen to resist decay and preserve her remains, a silent acknowledgement that even in burial, the hope remained that one day she might finally be identified. And then, for decades, there was only silence. The Cold War thawed and then ended. The world changed, but the woman in the unmarked grave remained a ghost, her story passing into Norwegian folklore. She became a national enigma, a shorthand for the deepest kind of mystery. Books were written, documentaries were made, but the core questions remained, locked away in the cold case files. The confrontation with this mystery would not come from a deathbed confession or a long-last letter. It would come from science, more than 40 years after her death. In the 21st century, advancements in forensic technology allowed for a new kind of investigation. The few samples that had been preserved, her jawbone and some of her internal tissues, were brought out from storage. Scientists conducted what is known as stable isotope analysis on her teeth. It is a remarkable process. The chemical signatures of the water we drink and the food we eat as children become locked into our tooth enamel, acting as a kind of permanent geological passport. By analyzing these isotopes, scientists can trace where a person grew up, and the results were astounding. They pointed with a high degree of probability to a specific part of the world. The analysis suggested that the ISDAL woman likely spent her early childhood in or around the city of Nuremberg, in what was then Germany. The data further suggested that she later moved, perhaps as an adolescent, to a region near the French-German border. This timeline placed her childhood squarely in the turbulent period of World War II and her young adulthood at the very beginning of the Cold War. Further analysis of her handwriting on the hotel forms concluded that she was likely educated in France or a neighboring country. Slowly, a faint outline of a real person was beginning to emerge from the mist. A girl born in Germany around the year 1930, educated in France, who then vanished into the clandestine world of shadows. These modern clues have not solved the mystery. They have only refined it. They make the espionage theory seem more plausible than ever. But they have not given her a name. The woman who so carefully erased her own identity remains, in the end, an enigma. She is a symbol of the countless secret lives that were lived and lost in the silent conflicts of the last century, her story a testament to the fact that some secrets once buried may never give up their dead. And so, we leave her there, in her quiet, unnamed grave in Bergen. The case file may be closed, but the mystery of the ISDAL woman remains open, a story without an ending. It is a reminder that a single life can contain worlds of secrets, and that even with all our modern science, we cannot always pull back the final veil. She dedicated her life to being a ghost, and in the end, she succeeded. But her story, with its unanswered questions and shadowy travels, belongs to the past. It belongs to the cold valleys and the forgotten hotel registries of a world that is no longer here. Here, in the comfort of your own space, there are no codes to decipher, no phantoms to chase. You have no puzzle to solve tonight. All that is left is to let go. Let go of the story. Let go of the day. Feel the gentle pull of sleep, a quiet and welcome friend. There is nothing more for you to do but to rest. Good night.